The lookout plates moved slowly toward and clustered about the red ones. The ultra instruments of the Secret Service operatives were probing into space, sweeping the neighborhood of the computed position of the pirate stronghold. But the object sought was so far away that the small spy ray sets of the Secret Service men, intended as they were for close-range work, were unable to make contact with the invisible planetoid for which they were seeking. In the captain's sanctum of the Chicago, the operative studied his plate for only a minute or two, then shut off his power and fell into a brown study, from which he was rudely aroused.
"Aren't you even going to try to find them?"
demanded the captain. "No," Cleve returned shortly. "No use. Not half enough power or control. I'm trying to think. Maybe. Say, Captain, would you please have the chief electrician and a couple of radio men come in here?" They came, and for hours, while the other ultrawave men searched the apparently empty ether with their ineffective beams, the three technical experts and the erstwhile quartermaster's clerk labored upon a huge and complex ultrawave projector, the three blindly and with doubtful questions, the one with sure knowledge at least of what he was trying to do. Finally the thing was done, the crude but efficient graduated circles were set, and the tubes glowed redly as their solidly massed output was driving into a tight beam of ultra-vibration. "There it is, sir," Cleve reported, after some 10 minutes of delicate manipulation, and the vast structure of the miniature world flashed into being upon his plate. "You may notify the fleet. Coordinates at H11.62, RA 124-31-16, and DX about 173.2. The report made, and the assistants out of the room, the captain turned to the observer and saluted gravely.
"We have always known, sir, that the service had men, but I had no idea that any one man could possibly do, on the spur of the moment, what you have just done, unless that man happened to be Lyman Cleveland."
"Oh, it doesn't," the observer began, but broke off, muttering unintelligibly at intervals, then swung the Visi-ray beam toward the earth. Soon a face appeared upon the plate, the keen but careworn face of Virgil Samms. "Hello, Lyman." His voice came clearly from the speaker, and the captain gasped. His ultrawave observer and sometime clerk was Lyman Cleveland himself, probably the greatest living expert in beam transmission. "I knew you'd do something, if it could be done. How about it? Can the others install similar sets on their ships? I'm betting that they can't." "Probably not." Cleveland frowned in thought. "This is a patchwork affair, made of gunny sacks and haywire. I'm holding it together by main strength and awkwardness, and even at that it's apt to go to pieces any minute." "Can you rig it up for photography?" "I think so. Just a minute." "Yes, I can. Why?" "Because there's something going on out there that neither we nor the so-called pirates know anything about. The Admiralty seems to think that it's the Jovians again, but we don't see how it can be. If it is, they have developed a lot of stuff that none of our agents has even suspected." And he recounted briefly what Costigan had reported to him, concluding, "Then there was a burst of interference, on the ultra band, mind you, and I've heard nothing from him since. Therefore I want you to stay out of the battle entirely. Stay as far away from it as you can and still get good pictures of everything that happens. I will see that orders are issued to the Chicago to that effect." "But listen, those are orders," snapped Samms. "It is of the utmost importance that we know every detail of what is going to happen. The answer is pictures. The only possibility of obtaining pictures is that machine you have just developed. If the fleet wins, nothing will be lost. If the fleet loses, and I am not half as confident of success as the Admiral is, the Chicago doesn't carry enough power to decide the issue, and we will have the pictures to study, which is all important. Besides, we've probably lost Conway Costigan today, and we don't want to lose you, too." Cleveland remained silent, pondering this startling news, but the grizzled captain, veteran of the Fourth Jovian War that he was not convinced.
"We'll blow them out of space, Mr. Samms," he declared.
You just think you will, Captain. I have suggested, as forcibly as possible, that the general attack be withheld until after a thorough investigation is made. But the Admiralty will not listen. They see the advisability of withdrawing a camera ship, but that is as far as they will go.
"And that's plenty far enough,"
growled the Chicago's commander, as the beam snapped off.
"Mr. Cleveland, I don't like the idea of running away under fire, and I won't do it without direct orders from the Admiral."
Of course you won't. That's why you are going. He was interrupted by a voice from the headquarters speaker. The captain stepped up to the plate, and upon being recognized, he received the exact orders which had been requested by the Chief of the Secret Service, now not as secret as it had been heretofore. Thus it was that the Chicago reversed her acceleration, cut off her red screen, and fell rapidly behind, while the vessels following her in their loose cone formation shot away toward another crimson flaring leader. Farther and farther back she dropped, back to the limiting range of the ultra cameras upon which Cleveland and his highly trained assistants were furiously and unremittingly at work. And during all this time, the forces of the 7 sectors had been concentrating. The pilot vessels, with their flaming red screens, each followed by a cone of spaceships, drew closer and closer together, approaching the Fearless, the British super-dreadnought which was to be the flagship of the fleet, the mightiest and heaviest spaceship which had yet lifted her stupendous mass into the ether. Now, systematically and precisely, the great cone of battle was coming into being, a formation developed during the Jovian Wars while the forces of the 3 planets were fighting in space for their very civilization's existence, and one never used since the last space fleets of Jupiter's murderous hordes had been wiped out. The mouth of that enormous hollow cone was a ring of scout patrols, the smallest and most agile vessels of the fleet. Behind them came a somewhat smaller ring of light cruisers, then rings of heavy cruisers and of light battleships, and finally of heavy battleships. At the apex of the cone, protected by all the other vessels of the formation, and in best position to direct the battle, was the flagship. In this formation every vessel was free to use every weapon, with a minimum of danger to her sister ships, and yet, when the gigantic main projectors were operated along the axis of the formation, from the entire vast circle of the cone's mouth there flamed a cylindrical field of force of such intolerable intensity that in it no conceivable substance could endure for a moment. The artificial planet of metal was now close enough so that it was visible to the ultra-vision of the Secret Service men, so plainly visible that the warships of the pirates were seen issuing from the enormous airlocks. As each vessel shot out into space, it sped straight for the approaching fleet without waiting to go into any formation. Gray Roger believed his structures invisible to triplanetary eyes, thought that the presence of the fleet was the result of mathematical calculations, and was convinced that his mighty vessels of the void would destroy even that vast fleet without themselves becoming known. He was wrong. The foremost globes were allowed actually to enter the mouth of that conical trap before an offensive move was made. Then the vice admiral in command of the fleet touched a button, and simultaneously every generator in every triplanetary vessel burst into furious activity. Instantly the hollow volume of the immense cone became a coruscating hell of resistless energy, an inferno which, with the velocity of light, extended itself into a far-reaching cylinder of rapacious destruction. Ether waves they were, it is true, but vibrations driven with such fierce intensity that the screens of deflection surrounding the pirate vessels could not handle even a fraction of their awful power. Invisibility lost, their defensive screens flared briefly, but even the enormous force backing Roger's inventions, greater far than that of any single triplanetary vessel, could not hold off the incredible violence of the massed attack of the hundreds of mighty vessels composing the fleet. Their defensive screens flared briefly, then went down, their great spherical hulls first glowing red, then shining white, then in a brief moment exploding into flying masses of red-hot, molten, and